the pelvic floor works really, really hard. It's the only muscle in the body that can physically stretch 3.5 times its actual length in normal sort of vaginal delivery. When that happens, there is a risk of tearing. Sometimes they have to do a little cut to help baby's head be delivered. And that in itself is a natural occurrence, but sometimes depending on the size of the baby and depending on the size of the mum and the size of her pelvis, that can have a hugely detrimental effect. And there are some tears that can be catastrophic actually in terms of how the pelvic floor can heal and respond. And a lot of women will struggle with continence issues, possibly pelvic organ prolapse, certainly pain and scarring afterwards. And it's often brushed under the carpet as, well, you've had a baby, what do you expect? It's common for sure, but I think the key message is that it's not normal and there is a lot of stuff we can do to help it better.
This is the Born to be Brilliant podcast, helping you harness the habits and unlock the tools to bring you more meaning, vibrance, and the personal power to help you shine like the diamond you are. Welcome everybody to another episode. Today I am delighted to have with me Emily Taylor. She's a physiotherapist who specialises in women's health and pelvic health. This episode is going to be full of some wisdom and nuggets that I know are going to support your well-being in your journey. So Emily, a massive welcome to the podcast.
Hi Lucy, thank you.
So Emily, give our listeners just a little bit of background and intro into you, your world, and what brought you into this line of work. We'd really love to get to know you a bit on that.
So I am a mum of two, busy life, of course. I've been a physiotherapist now for over 20 years, which is a bit scary. It was something I kind of always wanted to do. I've always been fascinated by human biology and sort of the physiology of how everything works. And I didn't really want to be a doctor. It felt a bit too intense in terms of the work hours, but physiotherapy kind of fit that hybrid really of having that knowledge and that expertise, but without 7 years at university and fits around life really nicely. So that was kind of what I went into really straight from college. I went to university in London, did my 3 years training, and then happened kind of on a bit of a whim really to get a job with the Ministry of Defence. So I did the kind of standard musculoskeletal sports injury type physiotherapy for the military, which I still do now. But actually over the last kind of 10 years, it's just taking me in a direction more focusing on women's health and pelvic health. And I think having had my own children, that was really where I felt my passion was, and I really noticed that I could make a real difference with it. And so for the last 2 years, I've set up a private practice in addition to my military work, and that's what I'm spending a lot of my time kind of focusing on now as well.
Amazing. And what do the people that you see, do people tend to come to you because something's wrong, like something's out of kilter, something doesn't feel right and they need something fixing? What's the typical person that you help facing?
So honestly, it really varies. Most of the time, it's because there's an issue. There's something they're worried about or something they've noticed that doesn't feel or look quite right. But often also, because I treat women right the way through all the different stages of life and sort of hormonal stages as well, it can be, just checking everything's okay during pregnancy or after pregnancy, just sort of doing a bit of a checkup, a bit of an MOT after they've had the baby, just to make sure everything's back where it should be and working as it should be in and around the tummy and the pelvic floor area. But more often than not, it's because something doesn't feel right or they've noticed that there's some incontinence or some pelvic pain or something just doesn't seem quite right. And certainly with a lot more conversation now, thankfully, about the perimenopause and the menopause and the changes that women are now sort of allowed to talk about, which I don't think was really the case before a few years ago. There's a lot more recognition of what those symptoms of menopause are, and actually that there can be things that can be helped, and physiotherapy is one of those things that can really help with some of the symptoms of perimenopause.
I wonder if, you might know the answer, but I wonder if there are things that could happen during pregnancy or through pregnancy that could set something out of whack that many of us maybe live with, don't really know about. And then later on, it rears its head in some way. And it's like, oh, well, that's because this happened way back when you had your babies or whatever. Is that a thing?
Absolutely. It's absolutely a thing. And a lot of people think if you have, for example, a cesarean section through delivery, then actually your pelvic floor is safe. And that's not the case either. But more often than not, obviously, the pelvic floor works really, really hard. It's the only muscle in the body that can physically stretch 3.5 times its actual length in normal sort of vaginal delivery. And so when that happens, there is a risk of tearing. Sometimes they have to do a little cut to help baby's head be delivered. And that in itself is a natural occurrence, but sometimes depending on the size of the baby and depending on the size of the mum and the size of her pelvis, that can have a hugely detrimental effect. And there are some tears that can be catastrophic, actually, in terms of how the pelvic floor can heal and respond. And a lot of women will struggle with continence issues, possibly pelvic organ prolapse, certainly pain and scarring afterwards. And it's often brushed under the carpet as, oh, well, you've had a baby, what do you expect?
Mm-hmm.
But it's common for sure.
Mm.
But I think the key message is that it's not normal, and there is a lot of stuff we can do to help it a lot better. And certainly those issues then tend, even if you fix everything as you need to as best you can at that point, when your hormones change again through perimenopause and menopause, it can often have a bit of a recurrence, or you're perhaps more prone or more vulnerable to some issues later on down that sort of path, just because those tissues aren't as good as they were before.
Yeah. It's really fascinating, actually. I wonder, like, so I personally did have I had a couple of very big babies for my size. I'm not very tall, as you know, and I'm not, I'm quite petite framed, but my babies were big. And I had them in fairly close succession. So I did notice some things. And I think the recovery between them, I did some work with a PT, and I think that helped. But if I'd known then what I know now, I would have definitely benefited from seeing somebody like you. And I did see somebody who crossed over in the chiropractic world and had some work done. But I believe there was something not quite right with my pelvic area. And to this day, I have problems in my lower back that come and go. And I'm like, I have no knowledge on this, but I suspect it's pelvic related. And I think as we troop on, don't we? We have our babies, we suck it up, we keep going. And then further down the line, like, you start to go, oh, this is really debilitating, or this is really setting me back. And we're all about high performance here. Most of us are people who are on a mission to put great things into the world and also be great parents and so on. I think it's so important that we get the message out there that, to see people like you, to optimize our physical body, this vessel that's going to carry us through in this life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like, what typically might somebody see or feel to know that, like you said, incontinence? I think that's hugely common. I was on a girls' trip once with women I didn't know, and the number of women that were saying that they had a problem, I was like, wow, okay, this is a big deal. Like, that's one quite obvious sign something's not quite repaired. Like, what other things do people see?
So pelvic organ prolapse is a really common one, and it can actually be a cause of incontinence, and that's why it's often missed or not considered, really, because people see the continence problem as the key one, and they notice it more because they have to rush the toilet, or there's a condition. It's actually called key in the door syndrome, but most people call it sort of colloquially key in the door syndrome, because as you think you get home, you're desperate for a wee, you're holding on, but just as you put that key in the lock, you can feel yourself kind of start, and the urgency is really building up. It's just how the brain and the bladder work together, but the pelvic floor needs to be able to support that. That can actually also be a sign that there is potentially a pelvic organ prolapse. And a prolapse is effectively where there's a weakening of the walls of the vagina. And so either the rectum, so the bowel, or the bladder itself, or sometimes the uterus from the top, can sort of drop inwards or lean inwards towards the vagina. So it often feels like kind of a heaviness sensation or a dragging sensation. If it's really significant, it can feel a little bit like you're sitting on a golf ball. If you have a look with a little mirror between your legs, sometimes, depending on the extent, you can actually see a little bit of a bulge there. But because of how that affects how the bladder and the bowel work, you can see how it might have an impact on your continence as well. And that will be the first thing that you probably notice that's more sort of disabling or debilitating, and certainly knocks your confidence. You talk about high performance professionals, we're aiming to be sort of the best of the best, and actually if you're worried about where the nearest toilet is, or whether you have to wear dark leggings just in case you have a leak, that's going to hugely knock your confidence, and it has a huge impact on someone's quality of life from a personal and a professional perspective as well.
Definitely. So if somebody has, I'm thinking back to my first as well, like if you have a baby. So something I noticed, I just share it all here. Something I noticed after my first, I was always very active and we would go running. And I remember going running with my baby, and we purposely bought one of those jogger pushchairs that you could run with. Yeah. I remember going running and literally being like, oh my God, like, something's not right here. Like, I'm like, it's like I wet myself, but I haven't. Like, what's going on here? And that was
Yeah.
my first clue that I was like, oh, okay, I need to do some work on my pelvis. Now, for a long time, I was like, yeah, running, unless I completely emptied my bladder, or doing jumping jacks, out of the question. Now,
Yeah.
that passed, and I'm glad to say I can run and I can do jumping jacks now. But, like, does that mean something was wrong, or is there a period of time that does happen after having a baby, or is it like yeah, when should we actually go, okay, let's look? I probably should have looked
So
at it, but
everyone's different.
right.
And again, it will depend on the size of you, the size of your baby, how baby was delivered, all sorts of different factors. And if you had any kind of pre-existing issues as well, if anyone's got any other kind of sort of connective tissue disorder or hypermobility that potentially leaves you more at risk. There's lots of other factors to consider, other injuries where muscles around the pelvis might normally be tight, your normal kind of level of exercise pre-pregnancy and what you were able to do during your pregnancy will also obviously have an impact as well. So there's lots of different factors, but it is very common, certainly I would say for sort of up to the first 4 to 6 weeks after having a baby, that things are not quite where they are. Normal tissue healing takes about 6 weeks to get that initial phase sorted. So I think after that stage, which is normally when you would see your GP for your sort of postpartum check, and baby has a check at that stage as well. If you still got issues, then that's when I would be looking to probably come and see a physio.
Right, yeah, because I think it is important to almost understand that we do need to give ourselves a bit of grace, that, body's
Absolutely.
just gone through something huge. Sure, you're not going to be instantly back to what you were, but it's knowing, well, at what point do we go, there could be more going on here, like,
Yeah,
let's look at this. What
absolutely.
was talk to me about the hypermobility. I've not too long ago found out that I'm hypermobile. I mean, it is kind of obvious. My elbows do this.
Yeah.
I should know. But I now know that, yeah, okay, I am hypermobile, and I again find that it will affect my back, because if your back is bending more, almost banana backing, your spine's gonna be, putting unnecessary pressure in places. But yeah, sort of talk to me about the hypermobile aspect in pelvis and birth and yeah.
So the reality is sometimes it can be a blessing, because if you're hypermobile and you're having a vaginal delivery, everything's going to stretch really beautifully and easily, which is helpful. However, in fact, I'm going to grab my little pelvis. So
Yeah.
for those of you watching, you can see the pelvis. But for those that aren't, at the front of your pelvis, there's a little joint where two bones meet in the middle. It's called the pubic symphysis, and a lot of muscles attach onto this.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the pelvis, a lot of people think that the pelvic floor is like a sort of a small strip of muscles going from front to back, a bit like a hammock. But actually, it's literally the full bowl of your pelvis is full of muscles. So for those that are watching, you can hopefully see that. But for those that aren't, just thinking about literally the bowl of your pelvis, literally imagine it as a bowl, and think about literally muscles going from one side right the way around to the other, and from the front of the pelvic bone right to the front, right the way up to the back, and attaching onto your tailbone at the back there as well. So if we think about how those muscles are working and how they're supporting, if you're particularly hypermobile, which means that your connective tissue, so your muscles, your ligaments, your tendons, are just that a little bit more stretchy. There's lots of different versions of that, and I'm not an expert in that by any means, but it just means things move and stretch much more readily, which for vaginal delivery, fantastic. However, if you have a particularly big baby, then the weight of that pregnancy sitting down into the pelvis is going to put a huge strain on those muscles and on those ligaments across that front joint there. So there are positives and negatives to it. Ultimately, there's going to be much more load. Things are going to be stretched before they're ready to be. And the pelvic pain you get during pregnancy, pelvic girdle pain it's called, is often where that joint at the very front of the pelvis is just being pulled constantly. It barely moves, but it's a fractional movement, but it's more than it ordinarily would do. And if you have any kind of hypermobility or connective tissue disorder, that's likely to be stretched more and be particularly uncomfortable.
I think I can almost feel that when you say it. It's like, oh, I can almost feel it, the memory in my body of that. Yeah.
You don't guess it.
No, I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but now you say it, I'm almost like, oh my God, I can literally pinpoint that feeling.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so, left untreated and whatever else, you soldier on, if you're like, physically fit and you crack on and you seem okay, like what can be the repercussions? Because I think, as we go, like you mentioned, perimenopause and into menopause years, and needing to go to the loo more often can be a thing anyway. So where might somebody start to see things later that maybe weren't addressed? And is it too late? What can you do?
No, absolutely not too late. Never too late. I have ladies in their 80s. That come and see me, and they have had incontinence for 10, 15, 20 years post-menopause, and they're not leaking after 3 or 4 sessions. So there's loads that can be done. It does work. You have to put a bit of work in, but it does help. So what repercussions are there? The first thing they might notice, especially going into perimenopause, if there is a tendency for the pelvic floor area to be affected, and obviously it doesn't happen to everybody. Everyone will have different symptoms. There's a list of about 40 plus different menopause symptoms, so not everyone will get, but very commonly things like vaginal dryness is one of the first things that people tend to notice, or kind of irritation on the skin around that area in the vulval region. Sometimes it can all just feel a bit sort of papery skin, a bit dry. And as that progresses without treatment, that can become what we call atrophy, which is where the skin becomes very tight and quite uncomfortable, really. But that's really easily managed with estrogen cream that you can just apply locally to the vulva. So again, it's something that's so simple. It's just recognizing it and not being afraid to do something about it and ask that question. Really.
Yeah, that's good to know.
The other side of it, again, one of the more common symptoms is incontinence. So just starting to notice that little bit of leakage, or sort of on a cough, sneeze, which is quite common, or on running, but also just recognizing that you're going to the toilet more often, or you start to do what's called toilet mapping. So you won't go out without knowing exactly where the toilets are, where you're going to be, which is a really, really common thing that people don't really realize they're doing, but it just slowly becomes a bit more of an issue, and you start to recognize it a little bit more and get a little bit worried about, well, actually, if I go there, when can I go to the toilet? Where's the nearest toilet? How far do I have to sit in the whatever it is? It's just starting to recognize those symptoms. Other things that are really common: pain on sex, sort of just reducing that pleasure as well, because the pelvic floor muscles are so important for all of that function. And if you're still having periods as well, which you will do through the majority of your perimenopause time, struggling to use a tampon as well, just wherever things kind of dried a little bit and become a little bit often tighter or overactive as a sort of pain response, it just feels really uncomfortable. And that's, again, something that people tend to notice, that things have just changed a little bit in that sense, and they're worried about it. They often don't want to report that, and they'll often come and see me and the doctor with incontinence sort of issues, and then when you ask a bit more, they've also got constipation, they're also got painful sex, they don't like using tampons, and suddenly it unravels, and there's a lot more to that story than they maybe put together as one complete set of symptoms.
I think it's fascinating, because I bet a lot of women have some of these symptoms and put it down to perimenopause and seek to address that without considering the physio side of things, and the fact that you can ease some of these symptoms with physio. I'm not suggesting, there's a place for all the things, right? But if that's ignored and people go straight to HRT or straight to something that's they think's going to fix it, because it's like, well, I'm just that age and this is just going to happen to me. But like, what if? So just take me through that. What does that look like? If somebody's, you see this and you're like, okay, there's something here we can do. What is that? What is treatment? How does it work?
So the first thing to find out. So first of all, I generally will work in conjunction with a GP. Obviously, I work privately, but if they need something specific or they're not on HRT, I will often recommend that we start that as well, even if they don't want kind of whole body HRT like the gels or the patches. Just using, as I say, some estrogen cream or some estrogen pessaries vaginally can make such a huge difference to their local sort of pelvic floor symptoms, in conjunction and in support of what we're then going to do from a physiotherapy perspective, just to increase that tissue health. That's the key, really. So I tend to work in conjunction with it. That said, there are obviously some people that just can't take HRT. They've had a history of cancer, or some of them are just too sensitive to it, some just have reactions to it. So there's always going to be working with the individuals as to what is most suitable for them, really. But from a physiotherapy perspective, the first thing is about understanding exactly what those muscles are doing.
Mm.
Most women will have been told, if they've had a baby, they will have been told by their midwife to just go off and do pelvic floor exercises.
Yeah.
The majority of women do not know what that means. And they don't know actually how to switch on their pelvic floor. They know roughly what they're trying to achieve, but more often than not, when I see them in clinic, they are squeezing their buttocks as well. They're squeezing their tummy muscles, they're squeezing their inner thighs, their legs together. There is some pelvic floor activity as well, but those other muscles are all kicking in, and ideally they shouldn't be, because we need to make that, certainly whilst they're learning how to switch them on, an isolated contraction. As we get better at it, longer sort of down the line in terms of the rehab, then we bring in that functional movement, and that's where those other muscle groups are really important, because we never just need continence when we're sitting down. We need it when we're up, lifting, carrying, running, etc. So we need those muscles to be able to work as well. But initially, it's about learning how to engage the right ones, first of all. So the first thing is to find out how weak they are. And also, what people don't recognize is muscles can be weak, but they can also be tight and overactive. So you can have a muscle that isn't doing an awful lot, but you can also have a muscle that's stuck in this really tight, overactive position. And that means that you still can't get the level of contraction that you need to provide the support that you require. And so with patients or clients that have that issue, it's about teaching them to stretch it out, to relax, to release it. Very much found in people who have got issues with stress or anxiety, because again, it's that sort of fight or flight trauma response to the body, just trying to protect itself at all costs. And those kind of really sort of type A personalities, the really driven, the high achievers that are just go, go, go perfectionists all the time, it's not an issue, but your body will respond to that in a physical way. And actually just learning how to manage that and how to address those issues when they crop up is really important. So from a physio perspective, I do a lot of relaxation work, a lot of sort of general movement and release work. Sometimes we need to do some hands-on kind of massage therapy in and around the pelvic floor, just to help to physically release off, just like you would your shoulders or your back if you had pain there. But then it's about teaching them how to properly engage those muscles, initially in a sort of lying or a sitting position, just to learn to engage them, and then to build into more functional movements so that they're learning to work with that extra level of activity, which is what they need from a day-to-day basis to stop those symptoms from impacting on their lives.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that leads me on to my next question, sort of an extension of that, because I'm thinking, like, there'll be people who are suffering, struggling with things that are resonating as they listen to this and go, maybe it's that, maybe it's my pelvis and not this or not that, and it sort of opens up that curiosity, and the benefits of doing this will help maybe relieve some of those symptoms, pains, and so on. So that's going to improve quality of life, ability to do all the things. But what if there's a case where somebody might be a bit more like me and go, it's fine, I'm fine. But like, I'm thinking, actually, listening to you, pelvic rehab, and I guess addressing, fixing, improving what could some of the added benefits of doing that be, if you're not particularly suffering or symptomatic of a problem, but actually, are there things that it can do to enhance or prevent further down the line if you were to go, oh, maybe this is something that could benefit me? Like, benefits.
Absolutely.
Yes.
The reality is, like with any part of our body, the fitter and stronger we are, the better quality of life, the better our general health is. Ultimately, pelvic floor muscles are muscles just like any other part, just like your bicep, just like your quadricep in your legs. It's exactly the same principle. So in the same way that you would go to the gym and maybe lift some weights and maybe do some cardio type exercise, this is just a version that's a little bit more tailored to a muscle group that we tend to forget about.
Yeah.
So in the same, you might do arm day, you might do leg day, you might do chest day, you might do a CV day. All of those can incorporate pelvic floor. It doesn't need to be a specific set, but it's just having the understanding and the knowledge and the body awareness really is what I spend most of my time teaching. The body awareness to engage those muscles and recruit them properly and effectively whilst you're doing all the other exercise. And that's really important, because then when we get to the point where our hormones start to shift and we head into that perimenopause phase, as our estrogen very slowly depletes,
Mm.
over that up to 10-year period. You can be in perimenopause for up to 10 years before you are officially postmenopausal. Over that time, we are losing muscle mass all the time. We're losing bone density all the time. And the best way to recover that or maintain or prevent that loss is to be doing resistance exercise, to be doing gentle impact exercise. And if you're pushing that pelvic floor with those exercises and you're not actually recruiting it properly, you're going to end up with potentially more issues. So it kind of works both ways, really. You're preventing hopefully future issues and you're maintaining a really good quality pelvic floor sort of health as you're doing that exercise at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense because I'm picturing literally feeling into my body as you speak, and it's like it's right there in your core. It literally is there in your core, and it's like you say, because you can't see it. It's not your abs or your biceps. It's not the ones you get to see. It's kind of inside, and if you ignore that, I can imagine the knock-on effects. It's like, oh, my knee, yeah, because your knee, because of the thing, because of the that's and it came from the pelvic area, it's, or my neck, yeah, well, your neck's like this because your spine this because your pelvic that, and
And
so
you can
it's
see it, if someone's a bit off, so you can see that, it's really obvious, but you can't see if one side of your pelvic floor is tight, and you won't know that.
no, yeah, and I think that's it. It's not obvious visually, even if you've not got obvious pain and discomfort. If it's out of whack, if you're not engaging it properly, if you're not working that muscle or you're ignoring that muscle, the repercussions. Fascinating, which is why this topic's so important.
It
Like,
is, absolutely.
and in the work sort of place, so people listening to this, may spend a lot of time at a desk sitting. They may spend more time being very physical and might be moving around a lot. I think regardless of where you are, obviously you need physical strength, regardless, just getting through life, work, parenting, all the things. So I can see how that would, having that strength and sorting that out and making sure you've got a strong pelvis and strong core is going to support you through your productivity. Are there any links? Because I love like connecting body, mind and soul. And it's like, if your body, I always say your body, your body's your physical vessel. You've got all the mind stuff, you've got all the inner workings. But if something isn't right pelvically or within your body, are there any connections with how that can impact brain function and just ability to focus, brain fog, concentration? I'm sure any amount of pain or discomfort can, or lack of sleep can, as we know. But are there any particular connections in your speciality that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably the biggest one comes from a continence perspective, actually, because if you're constantly aware of either needing the toilet really regularly, and some people, the average number of times you should go to the toilet is somewhere between 4 and 7 times in a 24-hour period. And some women will find they're going 14, 15, 16 times a day, plus potentially. And so if you're constantly thinking, oh, I've just been and now I feel like I need to go again, your mind is not on what you're doing. Your productivity is simply not there. You're not being efficient. You're not being effective in what you need to achieve. If you've got pelvic pain, like you said, like any other pain, but pelvic pain in particular, I would say, because if you are sat at a desk or even standing for long periods, it's a bit like when you said, oh, I can remember that pelvic pain from pregnancy. It's a really deep, gnawing pain. One of my clients particularly really describes it as making her feel incredibly vulnerable because it's such a deep, kind of personal area. Something there really hurts. It feels like a kind of a bit of a gut punch, It's a really internal pain. It's a raw pain, and no one can see it, so nobody can really understand it. You don't want to tell people about it because it's really personal, but you sit at your desk, or you have to stand at your desk or stand at functions or whatever it might be, and actually that can make you feel incredibly vulnerable. And I can completely understand what she said when she used that word. And again, if you're feeling vulnerable and you're not feeling confident and you're worried about it or you're concerned or you're just really uncomfortable all of the time, your productivity is simply not going to be there. So whilst I think you could say pelvic health isn't necessarily specifically related to that, I think there's a huge knock on just on general quality of life and on your own, mental health, your confidence, your ability to go out and enjoy and feel like you're really making a difference and making an impact is hugely diminished if you've got any of these symptoms.
And let's face it, when you feel good in your body, like I love waking up and knowing I've got that spark, that springing in your step, that vitality, it absolutely affects your disposition, your energy, your everything, doesn't it? And I think I talk about that from a sleep angle. If we wake up and we're groggy, we're brain fogged, like it affects your physiology, it affects your psychology, and they're all connected. So
And actually, on a sleep level, if you're getting up multiple times in the night to go to the toilet, you're constantly sleep deprived. You're not getting that decent level of sleep. You're constantly being, everything just feels a bit irritated. And that's something, again, that, from a pelvic health perspective can be dealt with. There are lots of different techniques that we can use to assist with that. But it's recognizing that that's a problem. It's recognizing the impact that it's having on you and that you don't have to put up with it. That's the key.
And the last thing we want as well is people dehydrating themselves because they're scared of going to the toilet too much. Like, oh, I won't be able to. So they don't then drink enough water, and then the knock-on effect of that. Is there any link to digestion with this? So particularly after having babies, I presume I picture like them, knocking everything out of whack in there, and then you have this baby and everything's got to kind of go back where it needs to go. But I think I had, making this up entirely with no medical backing, but I think that I feel like my intestines were squished, and for a while after, can't remember which child now, I think it was my second, I really struggled. If I'd have a steak, I would get into a point of real pain, and it literally in my mind's eye felt like it was getting stuck, like my digestive tracts were not open and flowing like they were before. Is that related in any, is there anything there?
Not specifically necessarily from a physical position perspective, but again, that shift in hormones, particularly postnatally, obviously you've had a whole host of hormones that have been fluctuating throughout pregnancy, and then they sort of drop off a cliff when you've had the baby because you don't need those hormones in the same way anymore. And they take a little while, they take a good few months to really even out. But those hormones are really important in terms of your gut motility, so how the muscles of the gut literally kind of push the food through your bowel. So it may be that it was something to do with that's what you were particularly struggling with. But I think the other thing that's really key is to recognize the impact that the pelvic floor has on the bowel, because it's not just urinary continence, it's also bowel continence, and constipation is a huge issue. You talked about dehydration, that can have a huge knock-on effect from a constipation perspective as well. And if you're sitting on the toilet, if you're straining, it's just completely confusing the muscles as to how they're actually supposed to work effectively, and then that can also have a knock-on effect as well. So there is a lot to that, because if you're constipated, you feel horrible. If you're really backed up, you get that kind of brain fog, your stomach's really uncomfortable, everything just feels a bit fuzzy and a bit nauseous, and you need that kind of detox, that natural detox out of your system. And if things aren't working properly, it can have a really huge impact on how you're functioning.
Yeah, I just sense that, like, the pelvis being there and supporting that kind of area in your body, and there being that kind of connection, that if you've either damaged or strained your pelvic muscles in some way, then that's got to surely play a part in all the movements that are going on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all so closely connected and so closely linked, and all the kind of the fascia, which is like the tissue that sits around all of those organs, they are all kind of stuck together in a way. They're all influenced on how other parts of the body move. The fascial connections literally go from head to toe. So that's often why you can get a random pain in one part of your leg because your shoulder's a bit tight, and it's just because those connections across and through the body are affecting one another, and particularly within the pelvis. We don't have a lot of space, there's a lot crammed in there. So if one area isn't 100%, it will naturally have a knock-on effect to how everything else is functioning as well.
I think nearly every time I have a guest on the show, I go, right, I'm going to do this. I want to work with you on this thing or that thing. And it's like literally, I go, well, okay. So, because I'm one of these people, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are, where I'm like, I'm good. Like I'm in good shape. I feel good. And so that it's not like I have something that's broken that I need to fix, but I'm all about optimization. And, I know that I had 2 big babies. I know that I probably did have, my pelvis probably has taken a toll, but I work out a lot. I do those things because I stay in good shape. But I also recognize and preempt and go, okay, but there's, if there's a bit of a weakness there, what is it you might be overlooking? And we all know that as we get older, we're more prone to things being strained or breaking or, malfunctioning in some way. And so I'm very much a prevent rather than wait and fix something. So it's like, well, what can we do to strengthen these things up? And when you are a busy entrepreneur and you're doing lots of things from the parenting to the life to the businesses and whatever, it's so important to keep your body in good check. So I think this is such a valuable conversation. I don't think that many people go, right, I'm going to have a great successful business. I need to look after my pelvis. But that's what we're all about with Born to be Brilliant. It's like all of the things that you may not have thought of, we bring together and go, how about this? Is this good? Is this good? I think it's such an important conversation to be having. And I don't think it's widely talked about enough. I think we're still...
No, it's absolutely not. As I say, the conversation is growing because of people like Davina McCall, who kind of made the menopause chat a normal conversation, which is fantastic. It's been really influential, which has been absolutely brilliant. But there's still a long way to go because people are starting to talk about it, but then the NHS isn't really able to support it in the way that we would all like it to. So there's been this huge influx of people who would say, well, I need to have HRT and I need to do this and I need to do that. And pelvic physio services are available in the NHS, but they're overrun. They're not hugely well. And the wait lists are crazy. So I just think being able to just kind of give these little nuggets of information and just things that women can be aware of, and at least even if they're not struggling at the moment or they've not got any symptoms, they know to look out for them. And they know that actually, if they do notice something, the quicker they can get it looked at, the much quicker the resolution will be. And they'll have some great knowledge then to be able to protect themselves and prevent further problems later on down the line as well.
That's amazing. It really is. And I think if we can do what we need to do to get ourselves in control of our health and our bodies, the NHS has its pluses, and certainly they can be great in emergencies. But when it comes to these sorts of things, optimization, you kind of got to be flawed and desperate. And even then you might have to wait forever. So if you want to optimize, usually you do have to take it into your own hands, and that's the truth of it. But, that's possible too. And I don't think everything private is reserved for the super wealthy. Like, there are accessible things privately that you can tap into, and like I say, do what we need to do to have the abundance to be able to do that, and keep our bodies in good health. Emily, I could carry on talking about this with you all day. I'm sure we will pick up a conversation beyond here, but I know there'll be people who want to know more and want to look into what you do and access perhaps your help, or if you're out of their geographical reach, maybe nowhere else they can go. So we'll put some links in the show notes to anything that you can share and how people can connect with you, if that's all right. And
great, thank you.
Anyone that's local to where we are, then they'll be able to find you more easily. But so helpful and inspiring listening to you talk about this today. Just thank you for the amazing work that you do.
Oh, thank you. No, as you can probably tell, it's a bit of a passion of mine, so I can talk about it for hours. I love it.
I love that. And you know what? I think that's one of the things when you are passionate about what you do. I talk about this with us women, especially when we love what we do and it doesn't really feel like work, we actually put ourselves in more of a vulnerable position, in a more of a vulnerable place for burnout, because we are so passionate. We don't necessarily have an off switch. All the more reason to make sure that our bodies can support us and
absolutely,
and help us.
Yeah, I can completely resonate with all of that, and certainly with some of the women that come through my clinic, I would say that's absolutely one of the issues that certainly plays a part in their symptoms as well. So
yeah, we've got to take care of ourselves, ladies and men. But yes, we have got to take care of ourselves. Oh, thank you so much, Emily, for this conversation today. And I know we're going to talk about this more. And listeners, there will be links for you to go and access Emily. I'm sure she can, she'll welcome any questions that you have after this. Just get in touch, and she's there for you.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and remember, go out there and shine your light bright, because you were born to be brilliant.